The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across Jessica Miller's face as she stared at the makeshift table, a cheap folding setup with a paper tablecloth tucked behind a dying palm tree, like something shameful that needed hiding. The waiter's eyes avoided hers clearly, uncomfortable with what he'd been instructed to do. The Blackwoods were very specific about the seating arrangement. The Blackwoods. Not mom and dad, never mom and dad, not once in 10 years. She adjusted her modest beige dress with her right hand, her only hand, and started the long walk across the reception hall. 200 pairs of eyes pretended not to watch. 200 guests in designer gowns and Italian suits pretended not to notice the 22-year-old girl being segregated like she carried something contagious. Mark Sullivan loosened his tie, the champagne in his glass untouched, his attention fixed on the young woman navigating through the sea of round tables draped in silk and adorned with towering orchid centerpieces. Each table sat 8, each table but one. The woman at the next table didn't bother lowering her voice. Can you believe Rebecca actually invited her? After everything the Blackwoods did for that girl, taking her in, after that horrible accident, raising her like their own. Like their own, her companion scoffed. Please, Linda, we all know why Richard really adopted her. His company was hemorrhaging money after those layoffs. Taking in a disabled orphan was the best PR move he ever made. Mark's hand tightened around his glass. He watched Jessica reach her table, saw her shoulder shake once, just once, before she sat down in that lonely chair, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the elaborate ice sculpture of two swans that she'd never be close enough to properly see. Daddy would have done something. Lily's voice, his 7-year-old daughter, wise beyond her years. Just this morning, she'd made him promise to make a friend at the wedding. You're always alone, Daddy. Mommy wouldn't want that. Patricia, 3 years gone, and her absence still felt like a fresh wound some days. She would have been halfway to that corner already, her fierce sense of justice blazing. She never could stand seeing someone isolated, someone made to feel less than human. The jazz quartet shifted to a slower melody. The bride Rebecca glided past in her $30,000 dress, her laugh tinkling like breaking glass. When her eyes swept over Jessica's corner, Mark caught it, a flash of satisfaction, cruel and deliberate. That's when he stood up. Mark, where are you going? Margaret from accounting grabbed his sleeve. They're about to serve the salmon. He gently pulled free. There's something I need to do. Each step across that reception hall felt like walking through honey, thick and slow. Every eye gradually turning to track his movement. A man in a modest department store suit walking away from his assigned place, walking toward the girl everyone had agreed to ignore. Jessica didn't look up when his shadow fell across her table. She'd learned not to expect kindness from well-dressed strangers at fancy parties. His voice was gentle. That's what made her finally raise her eyes, the unexpected gentleness. I'm Mark Sullivan. I work with Daniel at Blackwood Consulting. I couldn't help but notice you're sitting alone. It's fine. The words came out, practiced automatic. This is where they wanted me. I know, Mark interrupted softly, pulling out the empty chair across from her without invitation. But here's the thing. My daughter, she's 7. She made me promise to make at least one new friend at this wedding. She worries about me being lonely since her mother passed away. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. Would you do me an enormous favor and act like you're with me just for the reception? You'd really be helping me out. Jessica's breath caught. She searched his face for the joke, for the cruelty that must be hiding behind those kind brown eyes. But all she found was a sadness that matched her own, and something else. Genuine anger on her behalf. Your daughter, she managed, her voice cracking. She sounds very wise. Wiser than her old man most days. Mark smiled, and it transformed his whole face. So what do you say? My table has an empty seat, and I could really use the company. These accounting folks are nice enough, but they've been talking about tax codes for the last 20 minutes. A laugh escaped her. Small, surprised. The first genuine sound of joy she'd made all day. I don't know anything about tax codes. Perfect. Neither does anyone else. They just pretend. Mark stood, offering his arm. Shall we? Jessica stared at his extended elbow. In 10 years with the Blackwoods, no one had ever offered their arm to her. They walked ahead, embarrassed by her missing limb, embarrassed by the reminder of the tragedy that brought her into their lives. People will stare, she warned. Let them. She stood slowly, her hand trembling as she placed it in the crook of his elbow. Together they began walking back across the reception hall, and the whispering started immediately rippling out from their path like waves from a thrown stone. Everyone, Mark announced as they reached his table, pulling out the empty chair beside his own with a flourish. This is Jessica. Jessica, these are my colleagues from Blackwood Consulting. Margaret's mouth gaped. James from payroll choked on his wine, but Mark just smiled pleasantly, helping Jessica into her seat as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Margaret hissed. Do you know who that is? That's the Blackwoods' adopted daughter. The one they stuck in a corner to eat alone at her own sister's wedding. Mark's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Yes, I noticed. The table fell silent. Jessica stared at her plate, her cheeks burning. She started to stand. I should go back. Mark's hand covered hers, gentle, warm, steadying. Please stay. That's when the storm arrived in silver heels, in righteous fury. Victoria Blackwood descended upon their table like an avenging angel in designer silk, her husband Richard trailing behind, his face flushed with embarrassment and too much scotch. Victoria's voice could have frozen champagne. What do you think you're doing? Every conversation in a 30-foot radius stopped. The jazz quartet even seemed to play quieter, as if the musicians sensed the brewing drama. Jessica shrank into herself, that practiced submission returning instantly. Mrs. Blackwood, I presume. Mark stood, slowly positioning himself slightly between Victoria and Jessica. I'm Mark Sullivan. I invited Jessica to join our table. Is there a problem? Victoria's perfectly Botox face tried to express outrage, achieving only a slight eyebrow twitch. This is a family matter, Mr. Sullivan. You don't understand the situation. Then enlighten me. We took this girl in out of the goodness of our hearts. Richard stepped forward, his words slightly slurred. When she had nowhere else to go, no one else who wanted her. We fed her, clothed her, sent her to school, community college. Sent me to community college. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried. While Rebecca went to Harvard. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's composure cracked. How dare you? How dare she? What? Mark's calm voice cut through her building tirade. Tell the truth. That you took in a traumatized 12-year-old girl, not out of love, but because your husband's company needed good PR after laying off 300 employees. Gasps rippled through the growing audience. Someone had stopped the jazz quartet entirely now. Every eye in the reception hall had turned toward their corner. That's a lie. Richard's face had gone from red to purple. Is it? An elderly voice cut through the tension. Eleanor Reynolds, Daniel's grandmother, approached with her walker, her eyes blazing with octogenarian fury. Because I remember the headlines. Richard, Blackwood Industries CEO, opens heart and home to orphaned girl, right next to the articles about families losing their homes because of your layoffs. Jessica found her voice then soft but clear. 10 years of suppressed truth spilling out like water through a broken dam. I wasn't allowed to eat dinner with the family. I had an 8:00 p.m. curfew while Rebecca could stay out all night. You introduced me as a charity case you support at the country club. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I heard you tell your friends that taking me in was the best business decision Richard ever made. You ungrateful little. Victoria stepped forward, but Mark moved too, shielding Jessica completely. Finish that sentence, he said quietly, dangerously. Please give me a reason. The bride herself rustled over, then her wedding dress train carried by 2 bridesmaids, her face a mask of cold beauty. Mother, please, people are watching. Let them watch, Mark said firmly. Let them see how you treat family. Rebecca turned to Jessica, her eyes like chips of ice. You're ruining my wedding. No. Eleanor interjected, her walker thumping against the floor for emphasis. Your family's cruelty is ruining your wedding. This young woman deserved love, not a decade-long business arrangement. Jessica stood up shakily, her whole body trembling. I need some air. I'll come with you, Mark said immediately. They walked out together, leaving behind 200 stunned guests and a family whose carefully constructed image had just shattered like the champagne glass Richard threw against the wall in fury. The garden terrace was cool and quiet, the sounds of scandal muffled by distance and glass doors. Jessica leaned against the stone railing, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. 10 years. 10 years of believing if I was just quiet enough, helpful enough, invisible enough, They'd actually love me. Mark stood beside her, not touching, just present. Tell me about the accident. She was quiet for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. Power line came down in a storm, hit our car. My parents died instantly. I was trapped for 3 hours. My arm crushed under the collapsed roof. They had to. She gestured at her missing limb. I was 12. The Blackwoods showed up at the hospital with photographers. Victoria held my hand for the pictures, then didn't touch me again for 6 months. My wife died 3 years ago, Mark found himself saying. Brain aneurysm. One minute she was laughing at breakfast, the next she was gone. I know it's not the same, but I understand something about loss. About existing in spaces where you don't quite belong. Trying to be invisible enough that no one asks you to leave. Jessica turned to look at him then. Really look at him. Why did you really come to my table? Because I saw someone who needed to know they weren't alone. And because he paused, choosing his words carefully. Because something about you reminded me that staying silent in the face of cruelty makes us complicit. Your wife would be proud of you. I hope so. She had this way of seeing people who were trying to disappear and making them feel seen in the best way. He smiled sadly. She would have liked you. They returned to the reception to find chaos. Half the guests had left in disgust. The other half were clustered in groups, whispering furiously. The Blackwoods sat at the head table like ice sculptures, rigid and cold. But Eleanor had commandeered the microphone. 53 years of marriage taught me something, she was saying. Family isn't about blood or adoption papers or tax write-offs. It's about choosing to love someone every single day, especially when it's hard. She looked directly at the Blackwoods. Some of you could learn from that. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Robert and Jessica danced to one slow song, her single arm wrapped around his neck, his hands steady at her waist, anchoring her. Other guests approached throughout the evening, some offering support, others sharing their own stories of the Blackwoods' casual cruelties over the years. They made their housekeeper's daughter wait outside during Rebecca's birthday parties, one woman whispered. Richard fired my husband 2 weeks before Christmas, then bought a yacht, added another. The stories piled up like evidence in a trial the Blackwoods had already lost. At midnight, as the reception finally ended, Rebecca approached one last time. Her makeup had run, leaving black streams down her perfect cheeks. Are you happy now? She hissed at Jessica. You've destroyed everything. No, Jessica replied quietly. You destroyed it the day you let them put me at that table alone. Rebecca's hand raised as if to slap her, but Mark caught her wrist. Touch her, he said calmly, and I ensure every newspaper in the state runs this story with photos. Rebecca yanked free and stormed off her train, dragging behind her like the remnants of her reputation. The next morning, Jessica's phone rang at 6 a.m. Victoria's voice was arctic. You have 30 days to leave. Pack your things and get out. The line went dead. Jessica sat on her narrow bed in the servants' wing of the Blackwood mansion, because of course that's where they'd put her and didn't cry. She had run out of tears somewhere around year 5. Her phone rang again. Mark, I heard, he said without preamble. Margaret's cousin was working the coat check last night. News travels fast. I'll be fine, Jessica assured him. I've been saving money from my library job. Come stay with us. Mark's words hung in the air like a lifeline. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. We have a spare room. Lily would love the company. And frankly, so would I. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you deserve better than what you've gotten. Let us be your soft landing. Jessica stared out the window at the manicured Blackwood estate grounds. Her mind wandered back to when she'd first arrived here, a traumatized 12-year-old with bandages still covering the remains of her left arm. She remembered Victoria showing her to this room, not the guest room with the bay windows overlooking the garden, not one of the 3 empty bedrooms in the family wing, but this converted maid's quarters tucked away behind the kitchen. It's cozy, Victoria had said with a tight smile. In private. What she meant was hidden. Out of sight. For 10 years, Jessica had lived in this house but never been part of it. She'd eaten meals alone in her room or in the kitchen with Rosa, the housekeeper. She'd come and gone through the service entrance. She'd sat in the back row at Rebecca's graduation, not with the family in the reserved front row seats. She'd been a prop trotted out for charity galas and newspaper interviews, then tucked away again like a doll returned to its box. And all the while, she'd convinced herself that if she just tried harder, if she was just more perfect, More grateful, more invisible when needed, and more inspiring when required. They might actually see her as a person worthy of love. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mark. No pressure. Just know the offer stands. She looked around the sparse room that had been her prison and sanctuary for a decade. What did she actually own? What would she take? The clothes they'd bought her, always a size too large to hide her missing arm. The community college textbooks she'd paid for herself. The few books and mementos from her life before. It would all fit into 2 suitcases. 10 years reduced to whatever she could carry. She wondered what Jason would say when he found out. Jason Blackwood, Rebecca's older brother, currently working at his father's company's London office. The only one who'd occasionally remembered she existed. He'd send her birthday cards actually signed by him, not by Victoria's secretary like Richard's. He'd brought her souvenirs from his business trips. Nothing expensive that would draw his mother's ire, just small things. A keychain from Paris, a bookmark from Tokyo, a snow globe from New York. Little acknowledgments that she was real. Not exactly kindness, but not cruelty either. A middle ground that was the closest thing to family she'd found in this house. Jessica began pulling clothes from her closet, folding them carefully into the suitcase she'd kept stored under her bed. Always ready, always prepared to leave. A survival instinct she'd never quite shaken. She moved methodically, unemotionally, until she came to the small box hidden at the back of her closet shelf. Inside was a charred photo, the only one that survived the accident. Her parents on a camping trip, laughing at something beyond the frame, their faces lit by firelight. Jessica sank to the floor, the photo clutched in her hand. What would they think of her now? Would they be proud of the woman she'd become? Or would they be heartbroken by all she'd endured? Would they have fought for her? Would they have seen through Richard Blackwood's charitable facade? Would they have saved her from a decade of elegant neglect? She carefully returned the photo to its box. They couldn't save her then, but maybe, just maybe, she could save herself now. The kitchen staff were preparing breakfast when Jessica slipped in through the service door. Rosa looked up from the eggs she was scrambling, her eyes sad and knowing. "I heard, mija. News travels fast below stairs, too. Can I make you something?" Jessica shook her head. "I'm not hungry." She hesitated. Rosa had been kind in her way, sneaking Jessica extra desserts, leaving magazines on her bed. Not a mother, not a friend exactly, but sometimes an ally. "Will you be okay?" "After I'm gone," Rosa's weathered face crinkled into a smile. "I have been here 20 years. I will be here when they are all gone." She patted Jessica's cheek. "You go find your life. This was never it." Jessica nodded, blinking back tears. "Thank you for everything." Rosa returned to her eggs, but not before Jessica caught the glisten in the older woman's eyes. Some goodbyes were harder than others. Jessica avoided the main part of the house as she slipped back to her room. She didn't want to run into Victoria or Richard. She especially didn't want to see Rebecca, who was supposedly staying in the guest house with Daniel until they left for their honeymoon tomorrow. The less confrontation, the better. She had 30 days, but she didn't need them. She could be out by evening. One final act of compliance. Leave quietly without fuss. Give them what they wanted one last time. Then never again. She sent Mark a text. "If the offer still stands, I'll take it. Just until I find a place of my own." His reply came seconds later. "It stands. I'll pick you up at 6. Lily's already excited. Jessica felt something unfamiliar in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or terror disguised as hope. She'd been safe here in her way. Not loved, but not entirely abandoned either. A roof food education of sorts. The Blackwoods had given her the bare minimum and expected gratitude in return. What if Mark was the same? What if this was another form of charity? Another person who saw her as a project? A good deed, a way to feel better about themselves, but what choice did she have? She had enough savings for maybe 3 months' rent in a cheap apartment, but landlords wanted security deposits, proof of income, good credit. She had a part-time library job that barely covered her phone bill and bus fare. Community college credits that added up to almost an associate's degree. And one arm. The world wasn't kind to young women alone. It was even less kind to disabled ones. Jessica finished packing by noon, 2 suitcases and a backpack, a life in 3 bags. She texted Jason knowing it would be evening in London, leaving Blackwood Manor today. Got kicked out after the wedding drama. Hope you're well. She didn't expect a reply, Their relationship, such as it was, existed in a careful bubble of distance and plausible deniability. He was a Blackwood first, whatever else he might be second. To her surprise, her phone rang almost immediately. Jason. His voice sounded tired, strained. I just got off the phone with Father. He gave me quite a different version of events. Want to tell me yours? Jessica hesitated. What good would it do? Jason had never openly defied his parents. He'd gone to the schools they chose, taken the job they groomed him for, dated the women they approved of. He was the good son, the heir, the future. He might occasionally feel sorry for her, but he'd never choose her side over theirs. But maybe just this once he deserved the truth. So she told him everything. The table behind the palm, Mark's kindness, the public confrontation, Victoria's fury, the 30-day eviction that she was making moot by leaving tonight. Jason was silent for so long, she thought the call had dropped. Jessica, his voice sounded strange. I'm sorry, I should have done something. Years ago, I knew. I saw how they treated you. I couldn't. It's okay, Jessica interrupted. You were a kid too. I wasn't always a kid, Jessica. I'm 28 now. I've been an adult watching this happen for years. That makes me complicit. Mark had used that exact word. Complicit, as if there was a moral duty to intervene in cruelty, not just to avoid perpetrating it yourself. Where will you go? Jason asked. A friend offered his spare room, just until I figure things out. There was another long pause. Do you need money? The question humiliated her, but pragmatism won out over pride. No, I've been saving. I'll be okay. That's not what I asked Jessica. I asked if you need money, not want. Need. There's a difference. Jessica closed her eyes. Yes, I need money. If I'm going to finish school, get a real job, find a place of my own. Yes, okay. I'll wire you what I can. It won't be much right away. Father watches the accounts, but I can siphon off bonuses expense account padding. Give me your account details. Jessica recited her bank information, feeling both relieved and ashamed. Thank you. It's the least I can do. Literally the very least. He sounded disgusted with himself. I should have stood up to them. Just once. Jessica could hear the self-loathing in his voice. Don't do that. It wouldn't have changed anything except to make your life harder too. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, I failed you, but I won't anymore. I promise. Jessica didn't know what to say to that. People had made her promises before. The Blackwoods had promised to care for her, to give her a home, to be her family. Promises were just words until they weren't. The rest of the day passed in a strange limbo. Jessica stayed in her room, venturing out only once to make a sandwich that she couldn't bring herself to eat. She heard Victoria come home around 3, heard the click of her heels on the marble foyer, heard her barking orders at Rosa about dinner. She heard nothing of Richard, probably at his club, drinking away the embarrassment of last night, or at the office doing damage control. The Blackwood name opened doors in this town, greased wheels made things happen. But scandals closed doors just as quickly. At 5:30, Jessica carried her bags downstairs one at a time. 3 trips up and down the service stairs because she refused to ask for help and couldn't manage more than 1 bag with her single arm. She lined them up by the back door and sat on the bottom step to wait. She could have waited in the kitchen with Rosa, but that felt too conspicuous. She didn't want a scene. She just wanted to slip away like she'd slipped through this house for 10 years quietly without leaving a ripple. But it seemed the universe had other plans. Rebecca appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, still in pajamas despite the late hour, her face puffy from crying or drinking or both. Going somewhere, she asked, her voice flat. Jessica nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Good, Rebecca said, crossing her arms. You've done enough damage. Jessica looked at her adoptive sister. Not sister, never truly sister, and felt a strange mix of pity and anger. What had she done to Rebecca really existed? Taken a minuscule share of attention, been a living reminder that the world wasn't fair, that bad things happened to good people, that bodies could break and lives could shatter in an instant. Was that really worth a decade of small cruelties? Worth the satisfaction Rebecca had clearly felt seeing Jessica at that isolated table? You must be happy, Jessica said quietly. Finally getting what you've always wanted, me gone. Rebecca's laugh was bitter brittle. Happy, my wedding is ruined. My honeymoon is postponed. Daniel's grandmother won't even speak to me. 3 of my bridesmaids left without saying goodbye. My Instagram is flooded with people calling my family monsters. And it's all because of you. No, Jessica stood up slowly, finding a courage she didn't know she possessed. It's because of what your family did. I just stopped letting you hide it. The slap caught her by surprise. Rebecca had always been subtle in her cruelty, a whispered comment, a door closed in her face, a forgotten invitation. Never something as crude as traceable as physical violence. Jessica touched her stinging cheek, oddly calm. Feel better. Rebecca's face crumpled. She looked younger, suddenly more like the insecure teenager she'd been when Jessica first arrived. Why couldn't you just be grateful? We gave you everything. No. Jessica shook her head. You gave me shelter, not a home. Food, not family dinners. Clothes, not comfort. Tuition, not opportunity. You gave me the minimum required not to look like monsters to the outside world, and then resented me for needing even that much. You think I wanted a one-armed orphan for a sister? Rebecca's voice rose shrilly. You think any of us wanted you here? No, Jessica said softly. I know you didn't. That was always clear. What I never understood is why that meant you had to be cruel. Couldn't you have just ignored me? Wouldn't that have been easier than actively making my life miserable? Rebecca had no answer for that. She stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, mouth working silently. Jessica turned away, unable to bear the sight of her distress despite everything. Her phone buzzed. Mark was outside. It was time to go. She picked up her backpack and smallest suitcase, leaving the larger one for a second trip. Goodbye, Rebecca, she said, not looking back. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. Outside, the evening air smelled of cut grass and approaching rain. Mark was just getting out of his car, a sensible sedan with a child's booster seat visible in the back. His face broke into a smile when he saw her, then fell as he noticed her reddened cheek. What happened? Jessica shook her head. Nothing that matters anymore. Let me help with those bags. They loaded her meager possessions into his trunk in silence. Jessica glanced back at the imposing facade of Blackwood Manor one last time. 10 years in that house, and she felt nothing leaving it. No nostalgia, no regret, not even anger anymore. Just a hollow emptiness, where attachment should be. Was that healing or damage? She wasn't sure there was a difference. The drive to Mark's house took 20 minutes, cutting across town from the wealthy north side to the modest east side neighborhoods. Jessica watched the landscape change from manicured estates to small, single-family homes with actual character. Mark lived in a 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a yard that needed mowing. It was nothing like the architectural showcase she'd just left, but something about it tugged at Jessica's heart. Perhaps it was the wind chime tinkling on the porch, or the clearly handmade welcome sign covered in a child's glitter art, or the basketball hoop over the garage with its frayed net. Signs of actual living, not just existing. A small whirlwind in a purple dress burst through the front door as they pulled into the driveway. Lily, barely containing her excitement, hopping from foot to foot as she waited for them to exit the car. Jessica felt a flutter of panic. She hadn't been around children much. The Blackwoods social circle was conspicuously childless, their friends mostly business associates with grown offspring. What if Lily was frightened by her missing arm? What if she asked uncomfortable questions? What if she decided she didn't want this strange one-armed woman in her house after all? But she needn't have worried. Lily Sullivan had inherited her father's kindness and her late mother's lack of artifice. She bounded up to Jessica with a gap-toothed smile. You're Miss Jessica. My daddy said you're going to stay in our guest room because your family was mean. I made your bed with the butterfly sheets because they're the prettiest, and I drew you a picture for your wall. And can I show you my rock collection? Jessica found herself smiling genuinely for the second time that day. Yes to all of that, but the rock collection first, please. I love rocks. Mark carried her bags inside while Lily pulled Jessica by her hand, chattering nonstop about her third-grade class, her best friend Emma, the chapter book she was reading, and her extensive rock collection currently housed in 3 shoeboxes under her bed. Jessica let the child's enthusiasm wash over her, a cleansing tide of normalcy and innocence after the toxic atmosphere of Blackwood Manor. Lily didn't stare at her missing arm or ask intrusive questions. She simply handed Jessica rocks one by one, explaining their names mostly made up, in origins highly suspect, accepting Jessica's presence as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Later, after a dinner of spaghetti with jarred sauce and frozen garlic bread that tasted better than any meal Jessica could remember, Mark showed her to the guest room. It was small but cozy, with a double bed covered in the promised butterfly sheets, a simple dresser, a nightstand with a reading lamp, and a window overlooking the backyard. Lily's artwork, a somewhat abstract rendition of three stick figures labeled Daddy, Me, and Miss Jessica, was already taped to the wall. "It's not much," Mark said, apologetically, "but it's yours for as long as you need it. It's perfect," Jessica said, meaning it. "It's mine." That simple assertion of ownership, of belonging, even in this temporary way, felt revolutionary after a decade of living in borrowed space, wearing borrowed clothes, existing on borrowed time. Mark seemed to understand. He nodded, his eyes kind. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." That night, Jessica lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of a house she didn't know. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the occasional creak of settling wood, the distant sound of a television turned low. Mark, still awake, perhaps also adjusting to the strangeness of a new presence in his home. What was she doing here? What made her think she could just slot into someone else's life, someone else's family? Hadn't she learned her lesson with the Blackwoods? But this felt different. The Blackwoods had taken her in as an obligation, a business transaction disguised as charity. Mark had invited her as a choice, a deliberate decision to help someone simply because she needed it. And Lily had welcomed her with a child's uncomplicated acceptance. There were no photographers documenting her arrival, no press releases touting Mark Sullivan's generosity. Just a spare room, butterfly sheets, and spaghetti for dinner. Outside her window, lightning flickered in the distance. A storm was coming. Jessica thought of that other storm 10 years ago, the one that had changed everything. The crack of the power line as it fell, the screech of metal as it hit their car, the smell of burning rubber, and something worse. Her mother's voice, eerily calm. "Stay very still, sweetheart. Help is coming." Her father silent already, the rain drumming on the crushed roof, the weight of it pressing down on her arm, the pain unimaginable at first, then eerily absent as shock set in, the long wait for rescue pinned in the dark. The crash had taken everything. Her parents, her arm, her home, her sense of safety in the world. Then the Blackwoods had taken what little was left, her identity, her voice, her right to grieve openly, her hope for genuine connection. They'd repackaged her tragedy as their triumphant charity, her trauma as their redemption story. The crying orphan with the missing arm made Richard Blackwood seem human just when his company had been accused of inhuman layoffs and predatory business practices. Perfect timing, perfect optics, horrible reality. A soft knock at her door pulled her from these dark thoughts. Miss Jessica Lily's small voice came through the wood. "Are you awake? I'm scared of the thunder." Jessica sat up, momentarily disoriented. "Yes, I'm awake. Come in." The door cracked open, and Lily's small form appeared backlit by the hallway nightlight, clutching a well-worn stuffed rabbit. "Can I stay with you until the storm passes? My daddy says I'm too big for his bed now." Jessica hesitated. Was this appropriate? What would Mark think? But the fear in Lily's eyes was real, and Jessica remembered all too well what it was like to face your fears alone. Of course, she patted the space beside her. "Hop in." The little girl scrambled onto the bed, burrowing under the covers with her rabbit. "You don't mind?" Jessica asked. "Sometimes my daddy says I kick in my sleep." "I don't mind," Jessica assured her, settling back against the pillows. "When I was about your age, I used to climb into my parents' bed during storms too." Lily curled against her side, seemingly unconcerned about the missing arm. "Where are your parents now?" "In heaven," Jessica said, the familiar answer coming automatically. "Like my mommy," Lily nodded sagely. "Daddy says heaven is very far away, but love can still reach there." They lay in silence for a while, listening to the approaching thunder. Lily's breathing slowed, but just as Jessica thought she might be drifting off, the child spoke again. "Miss Jessica, does your arm hurt?" The question was asked with such innocent curiosity that Jessica couldn't find it in herself to be offended. "Not anymore," she answered honestly. "It did at first a lot, but not now." "That's good," Lily murmured sleepily. "My heart hurt a lot when Mommy died. Daddy's too. But it's better now, not all better, but better." Jessica felt her throat tighten. out of the mouths of babes. Yes, she whispered. Better. Not all better, but better. That was perhaps the most accurate description of grief she'd ever heard. The thunder crashed outside, but Lily, secure in her newfound sanctuary, was already asleep. Jessica lay awake long after Lily's small form warm against her side, the child's trust a weight heavier than her missing arm had ever been. For 10 years, the Blackwoods had treated her like a burden, an obligation, an inconvenience to be managed. In less than 24 hours, Mark and Lily had made her feel like a gift, a welcome addition, a person worthy of kindness without condition. If she'd learned anything in her 22 years, it was that people revealed themselves in crises. Richard Blackwood had seen a PR opportunity in her tragedy. Victoria had seen an unwanted responsibility. Rebecca had seen a rival for attention. But Mark Sullivan had seen a fellow human being in pain and reached out his hand. Act like you're with me. 6 simple words that had shattered a decade of careful cruelty and opened a door she'd thought permanently closed. Tomorrow, she'd start figuring out next steps. Look for a better job, finish her degree, find a place of her own eventually. But tonight, with Lily's small hand curled trustingly in hers and the storm raging harmlessly outside Jessica, allowed herself to feel something she'd almost forgotten. Safe, not because of locks or walls or money, but because of human connection. Because someone had seen her, really seen her, and decided she was worth seeing. Because for the first time in 10 years, she wasn't just being tolerated. She was being welcomed. The difference was everything. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through curtains Jessica didn't recognize. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, not in her narrow bed at the Blackwoods, but in Mark Sullivan's guest room with butterfly sheets and a small child curled against her side. Lily had apparently spent the entire night, her stuffed rabbit squeezed between them. Jessica carefully extracted herself without waking the girl and stood by the window. The Sullivans' backyard looked nothing like the Blackwoods' manicured estate, a wooden swing set showing signs of age, a small vegetable garden in one corner, a patio with mismatched furniture. What it lacked in elegant design, it made up for in obvious use. The slide had worn patches where countless descents had polished the plastic. The garden showed evidence of a child's help, rose slightly crooked markers written in uneven crayon. This wasn't a yard designed to impress visitors. It was a space where people actually lived. The smell of coffee drifted upstairs. Jessica quickly dressed in jeans and a loose-fitting blouse, making the most of her practiced one-handed techniques. She glanced at Lily, still sleeping peacefully, and slipped out of the room. Family photos lined the hallway, Mark and Patricia in wedding attire, Lily as an infant, the 3 of them at birthday parties and holiday gatherings. A visual history of love and loss that made Jessica's chest ache was something she couldn't quite name. Mark stood at the kitchen counter, already dressed for work, pouring coffee into a travel mug. Morning. Sorry about the midnight visitor. She has her own ideas about where she should sleep these days. Jessica smiled despite herself. I didn't mind. The company was welcome during the storm. Mark handed her a mug of coffee, asking about milk or sugar. The casual domesticity of the gesture, making coffee for someone else, anticipating their needs, struck Jessica as profound. The Blackwoods had never extended such simple courtesies. You're being very helpful, he said, pouring his own coffee. Lily usually takes an hour to get ready for school. Jessica cupped the warm mug with her hand. I like helping. It feels good to be useful. The word wasn't quite right, but she couldn't find a better one. The Blackwoods had always made her feel like a burden and obligation. Here in this kitchen, with its cheerful yellow walls and refrigerator covered in crayon art, she felt like a contributor. It was a subtle but seismic shift. Within 20 minutes, a tousled-haired Lily appeared clutching her rabbit. The 3 of them moved through a morning routine that felt surprisingly natural. Mark made breakfast while Jessica helped Lily choose clothes. Lily chatted about her school day ahead while Jessica detangled her hair. Mark packed lunches while Jessica helped Lily find her missing homework folder. They circled each other in the small space, filling gaps, anticipating needs, creating a harmony that felt impossible given their short acquaintance. By 7:30, Jessica found herself behind the wheel of Mark's car driving Lily to school. The child kept up a steady stream of commentary about the neighborhood, the house with the mean dog, the best shortcut to the playground, the corner store with the good candy. Jessica listened attentively, absorbing this normal childhood in this normal town, storing away each detail like treasure. When they arrived at the elementary school, Lily surprised her with a quick hug before dashing off. See you after school, Miss Jessica. The casual certainty of the farewell, the assumption that Jessica would be there, would return, would remain constant, caught her off guard. The Blackwoods had never expected her presence with such easy confidence. They'd never seemed to want it. The library where Jessica worked part-time occupied a grand old Carnegie building downtown. She'd secured the position 6 months earlier after countless rejections elsewhere. Her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, had hired her despite, or perhaps because of her disability, recognizing Jessica's meticulous organization and quiet determination. Mrs. Chen looked up in surprise when Jessica walked in through the staff entrance. "Jessica, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. Everything okay?" Jessica hesitated. She hadn't told anyone at work about the wedding confrontation or her sudden relocation. It felt too personal, too raw. But Mrs. Chen had always been kind, one of the few adults who treated Jessica like a capable young woman rather than a charity case. "I've had a change in living situation," she said finally. "I was wondering if I could pick up more hours." Mrs. Chen studied her face carefully, noting what Jessica wasn't saying. "We could use someone full-time in the children's department. Miss Abernathy is retiring next month. It would mean a significant increase in hours and a modest pay raise. Would that interest you?" The offer hit Jessica like an unexpected gift. "Yes," she managed. "That would be perfect." The children's department was her favorite, story times and craft projects, and helping small people find adventure between pages. She'd been filling in there occasionally when Miss Abernathy had doctor's appointments. The thought of making it permanent, of having a real position with real responsibility, made her heart lift. It wasn't just about the money, though, that would help. It was about being chosen for something valued for her abilities rather than pitied for her limitations. As Jessica shelved books that afternoon, her phone buzzed with a notification. A substantial bank deposit from Jason Blackwood. She stared at the screen, momentarily paralyzed. He'd actually sent money just as he'd promised. Enough to cover several months' rent if she chose to find her own place. Enough to finish her degree if she took a full course load. The text that followed was brief. "First installment. More to come. I'm sorry it took so long." Jessica sat on a step stool in the biography section, emotions swirling. Was this guilt, money, conscience clearing, true remorse? Did it matter? The practical part of her mind calculated what this meant for her future, the freedom it represented, the options it opened. With this money and the full-time position at the library, she could potentially get her own apartment sooner than expected. She could take more classes next semester. She could move forward with her life in ways that had seemed impossible just days ago. But the prospect of leaving Mark and Lily's home so soon created a strange hollowness in her chest. She'd been there less than 48 hours, yet already the thought of leaving felt like loss. The Blackwoods had been her legal guardians for 10 years, yet walking away from them had been a relief. What did that say about where she truly belonged? At 3:15, Jessica parked in the elementary school pickup line. She spotted Nancy Mitchell, Patricia's mother, standing near the entrance. The older woman approached, silver hair catching the afternoon sun. "You must be Jessica. Mark called to tell me you'd be getting Lily today. I wanted to introduce myself." Jessica braced herself for resentment or suspicion. After all, she was essentially stepping into this woman's territory, picking up the grandchild that Nancy had been caring for since her daughter's death. Instead, Nancy studied her with kind eyes. They've both been through a lot. They deserve someone who won't disappear on them. The observation wasn't quite an accusation, but the implication was clear. Jessica met her gaze steadily. "I don't have any intention of disappearing. For as long as they want me around, I'll be there." Nancy considered this, then nodded. "Good, then I'll see you Sunday for dinner. We do it every week." The invitation, delivered so matter-of-factly, left Jessica momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, the school doors burst open and children poured out. Nancy touched her arm briefly. "Patricia was a physical therapist. She worked with the amputees at the VA hospital. She would have liked you." Then she was gone, walking back to her own car, as Lily spotted Jessica and came running over purple backpack, bouncing with each step. The drive home was filled with Lily's detailed account of second-grade drama, the spelling test, the playground, politics, the science experiment gone awry. Jessica listened, marveling at how much life could be packed into one 7-year-old's day. When they pulled into the driveway, Lily unbuckled and looked at Jessica seriously. "Are you going to stay with us for a long time, Miss Jessica?" The question hit Jessica like a physical blow. How to answer honestly without making promises she couldn't keep. "I'm going to stay as long as your dad says it's okay," she said carefully, "and as long as you're happy having me here." Lily considered this, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Daddy's happier when you're here," he smiled at breakfast. "He doesn't always do that." The innocent observation carried more weight than Lily could possibly understand. Jessica swallowed past the sudden tightness in her throat. "Come on," she managed. "Let's get your homework done and then you can tell me more about these rocks you've been collecting." By the time Mark texted that he'd be home by 6, Jessica had helped with math problems, listened to reading practice, and learned more about quartz than she'd ever thought possible. On impulse, she decided to make dinner. Her cooking skills were limited. The Blackwoods had never encouraged her to use their kitchen, but pasta seemed manageable. When Mark walked through the door, the kitchen smelled of garlic and tomatoes. Lily was setting the table with minimal supervision, and Jessica was draining pasta one-handed with a technique she'd developed through trial and error. Mark stopped in the doorway, his expression a mixture of surprise and something softer, harder to define. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Jessica replied. "I wanted to." Dinner was simple but comfortable. Lily dominating the conversation with school stories while Mark and Jessica exchanged amused glances over her head. When they finished, Mark insisted on washing dishes since Jessica had cooked. "He looks different when he smiles," she thought, watching him rinse plates while singing an off-key duet with Lily about bubbles. Younger? Less weighted. She wondered if she looked different too, away from the oppressive atmosphere of Blackwood Manor. After Lily's bedtime, Jessica told Mark about the full-time position at the library and Jason's unexpected financial support. "It means I'll be able to get my own place sooner than I thought," she concluded. "I don't want to impose on you and Lily any longer than necessary." Mark was quiet for a moment, his face thoughtful in the soft kitchen light. "You're not imposing, Jessica, not on me and certainly not on Lily, but I understand if you want your own space. Just know there's no rush from our end." Jessica nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders. The Blackwoods had always made her feel like she was taking up space that wasn't rightfully hers. Mark was offering the opposite space that was hers for as long as she wanted it. 3 days after her arrival at the Sullivan household, Jessica received an email that changed everything. Columbia University had accepted her transfer application to their disability studies program. Moreover, they were offering a partial scholarship based on academic merit and compelling personal circumstances. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but combined with Jason's money and her new full-time position at the library, it suddenly made Columbia a viable possibility rather than an impossible dream. Jessica stared at her phone, feeling slightly dizzy. Columbia, New York, a real degree from a prestigious university, a future she'd barely allowed herself to imagine. But New York was hours away. She'd have to leave the library job she'd just been promoted in, leave the first people who'd shown her genuine kindness in a decade, leave Lily, who was already attached to her, leave Mark, who was... She stopped that thought before it could fully form. She didn't mention the acceptance, immediately uncertain how to broach the subject. The Blackwoods would have dismissed it outright. Columbia was for people like Rebecca, not charity cases like Jessica. But keeping it secret felt dishonest in a way that made her uncomfortable. This household operated on different principles than Blackwood Manor. Here, truth seemed to be the default setting. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Jessica finally found her courage. "I heard from Columbia today. They accepted me into their disability studies program." Mark looked up from the vegetables he was chopping, his expression immediately supportive. "Jessica, that's incredible. Congratulations." The genuine enthusiasm in his voice, with no trace of the dampening influence Victoria would have employed, made Jessica's chest warm. "When would you start?" Mark asked, resuming his chopping. "Fall semester," Jessica replied, watching his face carefully for any sign of disappointment or relief. "And it's in New York." Mark's hands stilled momentarily, but his expression remained open. "That's a big move, but an exciting opportunity. If Columbia is your dream, you should pursue it." The unconditional support, so different from what Jessica had come to expect, left her momentarily speechless. The Blackwoods had conditioned her to believe that any choice benefiting herself came at the expense of their approval. Mark was offering something radically different: encouragement, without string support, without obligation. Later that week, Jessica's phone buzzed with an unexpected text. "Rebecca Blackwood. I'm at the Starbucks on Main Street. Can we talk, just us?" Jessica stared at the message, her stomach nodding. Rebecca, who had watched with satisfaction as Jessica was assigned to that isolated wedding table, who had slapped her in a moment of raw fury. What could she possibly want now Mark was at work, Lily at school? There was nothing preventing Jessica from meeting Rebecca except her own trepidation. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she texted back. The Starbucks was busy with late morning customers. Rebecca sat alone at a corner table, 2 cups in front of her designer clothes in perfect posture, making her stand out despite her obvious attempt to blend in. "I got you a chai latte," she said as Jessica approached. "You used to like those." The gesture, unexpectedly thoughtful, threw Jessica off balance. She sat down cautiously, accepting the offered cup. "Thank you." They regarded each other in awkward silence, these two women raised in the same house who had never truly been sisters. "Daniel's staying with his grandmother," Rebecca said finally. "Eleanor Reynolds, she won't let me in the house. Says I'm just like my mother." The brittle edge to her voice suggested this assessment had hit home. Jessica wasn't sure how to respond, so she sipped her chai, instead waiting. "Father's drinking more," Rebecca continued. "The company's lost 3 major clients. Mother's been asked to resign from the hospital board." She looked up suddenly, her eyes hard. "Your new friend has quite the reputation for integrity at the office. He's been promoted twice since you left, taking over some of Father's clients who specifically requested not to work with the Blackwood family anymore." The accusation was clear in her tone that Mark had somehow profited from the Blackwoods' downfall. Jessica felt her spine stiffen. "Mark's promotion has nothing to do with me or your family. He's good at his job. He has been for years." Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "Everyone's good at their job until there's an opportunity for advancement. Then suddenly they're willing to throw colleagues under the bus. Father always said loyalty was in short supply in business." Jessica set her cup down carefully. "Is that why you wanted to meet, to imply that Mark somehow orchestrated your family's current difficulties?" "No," Rebecca said, her composure cracking slightly. "I wanted to understand what Jessica asked. What could Rebecca Blackwood possibly need to understand after 10 years of studiously avoiding any real knowledge of Jessica? Why they took you in," Rebecca said quietly. "Why they treated you the way they did. Why I—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Why I went along with it." The admission, so unexpected, left Jessica momentarily speechless. Rebecca had never before acknowledged that her parents' treatment of Jessica had been wrong, that her own behavior had been complicit. "I was 14 when you came," Rebecca continued. "Old enough to know better, young enough to be afraid of questioning my parents. They'd always been so certain about everything, where I would go to school, who my friends would be, what activities I would excel in. Then suddenly there was you, this broken girl with one arm and sad eyes, and they were parading you around like a trophy they'd won." Jessica flinched at the description, but Rebecca pressed on. "I knew it was wrong, even then. But I also knew that questioning meant consequences. Disappointing them meant becoming dispensable." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Dispensable. Had Rebecca feared becoming like Jessica, tolerated rather than loved, included as an obligation, rather than cherished as a daughter? "I used to imagine what would happen if I failed them," Rebecca admitted, not meeting Jessica's eyes. "If I got bad grades, if I didn't get into Harvard, if I embarrassed them socially. Would they treat me the way they treated you? Would they stop loving me?" "They wouldn't have stopped loving you," Jessica said quietly. "They actually loved you to begin with." Rebecca looked up sharply, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "Did they? Or did they just love what I represented, the perfect Blackwood daughter, the extension of their legacy, the reflection of their success?" Question was raw, urgent, as if Rebecca had been carrying it for years without ever daring to speak it aloud. Jessica had no answer that wouldn't wound further. Instead, she asked her own question. "Why did you want me at that table alone, Rebecca? At your wedding, why was that so important to you?" Rebecca's face flushed with shame. "Because for one day I wanted everyone looking at me. Not at poor one-armed Jessica who overcame such tragedy. Not at Richard and Victoria Blackwood's incredible charity. Just at me. The bride." The admission, selfish but painfully human, hung in the air between them. "It doesn't have to be a competition," Jessica said finally. "There's room for both of us to matter." Rebecca stared at her, something like wonder crossing her face. "How are you not more damaged? After everything we did to you, How can you sit there and be reasonable? Jessica considered the question seriously. Maybe I am damaged, she admitted, but I'm healing. I'm learning what healthy relationships look like, what real support means. Rebecca's expression turned wistful. With Sullivan and his daughter. Not exactly. Jessica hedged, uncomfortable with the implication. They've been kind to me. They've given me a safe place while I figure things out. Rebecca nodded slowly. That's more than we ever did. I should go, Rebecca said, gathering her purse. Daniel's waiting for me. We're going to couples counseling, trying to fix things. She hesitated, then added, I'm sorry, Jessica, for everything, for 10 years of cruelty and neglect, for that table at my wedding, for the slap afterward, for not being the sister you deserved. The apology, imperfect but sincere, hung between them like a bridge partially built. Thank you, Jessica said simply, for saying that. And Rebecca? Rebecca paused, her expression guarded. Be careful not to repeat your parents' mistakes with Daniel. Don't make love conditional. Don't turn connection into competition. It ruins everyone involved. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly at the directness of the advice, but after a moment she nodded. I'm trying not to, she said quietly. Then she was gone, leaving Jessica alone with the cooling chai latte and the unsettling awareness that even the villains in our personal narratives have their own complicated stories. A month into Jessica's stay with the Sullivans, financial reality intruded on their developing routine. Mark came home one evening looking distinctly troubled. When Lily was finally asleep, he explained the fallout from the Blackwood situation was affecting more than just Richard's company. Clients were nervous, pulling accounts, demanding reassignments. Mark's recent promotion had brought more responsibility, but also more stress, and the company was instituting temporary pay cuts to avoid layoffs. It's only for a few months, he assured Jessica. We'll be fine, but we might need to tighten our belts a bit. I wanted you to know. Jessica nodded, appreciating his honesty. The Blackwoods would never have discussed financial concerns with her. They would have simply reduced her allowance without explanation, making her feel like an even greater burden. I want to contribute more, she said. I'll have my first full paycheck from the library next week. I can help with groceries, utilities, whatever you need. Mark looked as if he might protest, then seemed to reconsider. That's really generous, but this is temporary, Jessica. I don't want you depleting your savings for something that's not your problem. I'm living here, Jessica pointed out, using electricity, water, eating food. It seems fair to contribute. And Mark, this isn't charity. This is me being a responsible adult. The clarification felt important, a declaration of identity separate from her role as recipient of others' generosity. Mark studied her face, then nodded. Okay, but let's be clear about expectations. We'll split utilities and groceries 3 ways, but I won't take rent from you. Use that money for school, for your future. This isn't about financial need, Jessica. This is about respecting your autonomy. The arrangement brought a subtle shift in their household dynamic. Jessica was no longer simply a guest. She was a contributor, a participant in the family's economic decisions. When the refrigerator broke unexpectedly the following week, she didn't hesitate to offer part of her savings toward the replacement. When Lily needed new shoes because she'd outgrown her old ones overnight, Jessica split the cost with Mark without discussion. Small acts of financial partnership that built something deeper than gratitude between them. The Blackwoods' situation continued to deteriorate. Jessica heard occasional updates from Jason, who had extended his business trip indefinitely to help manage the company crisis. Richard was drinking heavily, making erratic decisions. Victoria was frantically trying to salvage their social standing with limited success. Rebecca and Daniel were in counseling, their marriage strained by the public humiliation of the wedding incident. Jessica absorbed these updates with a complex mixture of emotions: concern for people who had hurt her deeply, a relief at her escape from their toxic environment, guilt at the role she'd played in their downfall. Mark noticed her distraction one evening as they washed dishes together. You're thinking about them again, he said gently. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. I keep wondering if I did the right thing, Jessica admitted. Standing up at the wedding, exposing them publicly. Maybe I should have just eaten at that ridiculous table and gone home quietly. Mark set down the plate he was drying. The Blackwoods created that situation, Jessica. Not you. All you did was refuse to participate in your own humiliation. But look at the consequences, Jessica argued. Richard might lose his company. Their reputation is in tatters. Rebecca's marriage is struggling. It feels like I destroyed their lives because they hurt my feelings. Mark turned to face her fully. They exploited a traumatized child for PR while emotionally neglecting her for a decade. That's not hurt feelings. That's sustained psychological harm. What's happening now isn't punishment. It's consequences. Natural ones. Jessica wasn't entirely convinced, but Mark's perspective offered a framework that helped ease her guilt. The Blackwoods had made choices, countless small decisions, to treat her as less than to use her tragedy for their benefit to maintain an image of charity while practicing cruelty. What was happening now flowed from those choices, not from Jessica's refusal to keep pretending. 6 weeks after Jessica's arrival, she received a communication that forced a decision she'd been avoiding. Columbia wanted her answer about the fall semester. She needed to accept or decline the admission offer and scholarship by the end of the week. The library position in New York was also waiting on her response. Jessica sat at the small desk in her room, no longer a guest room in her mind, but her space filled with library books, secondhand clothing, and a few treasured possessions from her previous life. The Columbia acceptance letter lay before her alongside printouts of New York apartment listings and transportation maps. Logistically, it could work. Jason's financial support, combined with the scholarship and the library job, would make it possible if not comfortable. But the thought of leaving the Sullivan household created a hollow ache in her chest. In just 6 weeks, this modest colonial with its creaky floors and wind chimes had become more home than Blackwood Manor had been in 10 years. Lily's gap-toothed smiles and rock collection lectures, Mark's quiet strength and unexpected humor, their shared routines and inside jokes and Sunday dinners with Nancy, the thought of giving all that up for a dorm room or tiny apartment in New York felt like willingly returning to exile. Yet Columbia represented everything she'd dreamed of during those long years, with the Blackwoods' academic validation, professional training, a community of scholars who understood disability as something other than tragedy. It was her path to independence, to a career helping others like herself, to becoming more than the one-armed orphan the Blackwoods had taken in. How could she walk away from that opportunity? She was still wrestling with the decision when Mark knocked on her door that evening. "Can I come in? I want to talk to you about something." He looked serious in a way that made Jessica's stomach clench. She gestured for him to enter, bracing herself. Had he somehow sensed her indecision about Columbia? Was he going to encourage her to leave, to pursue her education, to move on? Mark sat on the edge of her bed, hands clasped between his knees. "I've been thinking about your Columbia acceptance," Jessica nodded, waiting for the gentle push toward New York that she both dreaded and expected. What Mark said next caught her completely off guard. "What if you started with their online program? Columbia offers most of their first-year courses virtually now. You could begin your degree while staying here, defer the in-person component until spring semester. It would give you time to save more money, find better housing options, figure out if the program is really what you want." Jessica stared at him, processing this unexpected third option. She'd been so caught in the binary choice, go to New York or give up Columbia, that she hadn't considered alternatives. "Is that even possible?" she asked. Mark nodded. "I did some research. Their disability studies program specifically offers remote options for students who can't relocate immediately. Given your own situation, I imagine they'd be particularly understanding." The surge of hope that rose in Jessica's chest surprised her with its intensity. It wasn't just relief at postponing a difficult choice. It was genuine excitement at the possibility of having both her education and this newfound family connection. "But why?" she asked, watching Mark's face carefully. "Why go to all this trouble to research alternatives?" Mark's expression softened. "Because I think Columbia is a fantastic opportunity for you. And because," his voice faltered momentarily, "because Lily and I would miss you if you left. We've grown rather attached to having you around." The admission offered with such simple honesty made Jessica's throat tighten. "I've grown attached to being around," she managed. There was a moment of charged silence, possibilities hanging between them. Then Mark stood, his practical accountant side reasserting itself. "Anyway, it's just an option to consider. Whatever you decide, we support you." Jessica nodded, unable to trust her voice. After he left, she sat for a long time staring at the Columbia letter, thinking about chosen families and compromise and the unexpected paths that healing could take. The following morning, Jessica sent two emails, one to Columbia, requesting to begin their program online for the fall semester with a transition to in-person in the spring, and one to the university library, respectfully declining their job offer while expressing interest in future opportunities. The responses came quickly. Columbia was delighted to accommodate her request, citing her as an ideal candidate for their flexible enrollment initiative. The library expressed regret, but kept the door open for spring semester positions. A weight Jessica hadn't realized she was carrying lifted from her shoulders. She didn't have to choose between education and connection, between ambition and belonging. She could pursue her dreams without sacrificing her newfound family. It wasn't a perfect solution. Online learning presented its own challenges, and she'd still need to move to New York eventually, but it was a path forward that honored all parts of herself. When she shared the news with Mark and Lily over dinner, their reactions confirmed she'd made the right choice. Mark's smile held relief alongside his congratulations. Lily was simply thrilled that Miss Jessica wasn't going away to the big city just yet. "We can still do Sunday dinners with Grandma Nancy," she exclaimed. "And you can help me with my science fair project in October," the casual inclusion. The assumption that Jessica would remain part of their lives through seasonal changes and family traditions filled her with a warmth that no acceptance letter could match. The Blackwoods had never made future plans that included her. They'd tolerated her presence in the moment without imagining her as part of their ongoing story. The Sullivans did the opposite. They wove her into their narrative as if she'd always belonged there. 2 months after the wedding incident, Jessica received word that Richard Blackwood had been involved in a single-car accident driving under the influence. He wasn't seriously injured, but the public humiliation added to the family's mounting troubles. The news came via Jason, whose texts had become more frequent, evolving from formal financial updates to something approaching genuine communication. "Father's going to rehab," he wrote. "Mother's furious, but the board insisted. It's actually the best thing that could happen." Jessica sat with this information, uncertain how to feel. The Blackwoods' downfall brought her no joy, but she couldn't deny the justice in Richard facing consequences for his choices. She wondered if rehab might actually help him, if beneath the imperious CEO persona there might be someone capable of change. When she shared the news with Mark that evening, his response surprised her. "We should send a card." Jessica stared at him. "A card? To Richard Blackwood? The man who used me for PR, then treated me like an inconvenience for 10 years. Mark's expression was thoughtful. "Not for his sake, for yours." Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is show compassion to those who showed us none. Jessica wasn't convinced, but that weekend, Lily settled the matter in her straightforward 7-year-old way. When Jessica explained in simplified terms that Mr. Blackwood was sick and needed special doctors to get better, Lily's response was immediate and certain. "We should make him a get-well card. That's what you do when people are hurt, even if they weren't very nice." The wisdom in this simple statement, the recognition that compassion wasn't dependent on the recipient's worthiness, settled something in Jessica's chest. That evening, she drove to the rehabilitation facility alone, a simple card signed by all three Sullivans in hand. The nurse at the desk seemed skeptical when Jessica asked to see Richard Blackwood, but directed her to a small lounge where patients could receive visitors. Richard looked smaller somehow, stripped of his expensive suit and corner office. In hospital-issued clothing with several days' growth of beard, he appeared older, more vulnerable. He looked up as Jessica entered, surprise flickering across his face before his expression settled into something more guarded. "I didn't expect to see you here." Jessica sat in the vinyl chair across from him, suddenly uncertain why she'd come. "I heard about the accident. I wanted to—" She paused, realizing she didn't know how to finish that sentence. "Check on you, offer forgiveness. Seek closure, make sure you're suffering appropriately." None of those quite captured her complicated motivations. Richard saved her the trouble of explaining. "I've been better," he said dryly, gesturing around the institutional room with its motivational posters and artificial plants. 30 days of sobriety and group therapy. Victoria's thrilled, as you can imagine. The sarcasm was familiar but lacked its usual bite. Beneath it, Jessica detected something like resignation, or perhaps the beginning of honesty. "I brought a card," she said, extending the envelope. "From me and the family I'm staying with." Richard took it, his expression unreadable. "Sullivan, you're living with Mark Sullivan." Jessica nodded, watching his face carefully. "Yes, with Mark and his daughter, Lily." Richard opened the card, reading the simple message aside, his eyebrows raised slightly at the childish scrawl beneath the printed text. Get better soon, Mr. Blackwood. From Lily, age 7. He looked up at Jessica. She knows who I am. How things were. She knows you were my guardian, Jessica said carefully, and that things weren't always good between us. She's 7. She believes people can change. Richard studied the card for another moment, then set it on the side table. She sounds like a wise child. Jessica smiled slightly. She is, though she also believes rocks have feelings and that thunder is caused by monsters. A ghost of a smile touched Richard's face, so brief Jessica might have imagined it. Why did you come? Jessica, not to check on my health. Jessica considered the question, wanting to be honest. Because I needed to see you as a person, she said finally. Not as the CEO who used me for PR, not as the villain in my story. Just as a flawed human being who made mistakes, like we all do. Richard's eyes met hers, a flash of something like respect in them. You've changed, he said. There's a steadiness to you now. You're not that frightened girl anymore. Jessica nodded. I'm not. I'm finding my own way. With help. They talked for nearly an hour, not about the past, not about the Blackwoods' many failures or Jessica's new life, but about recovery. Richard was surprisingly forthcoming about the program, about his struggle with alcohol, about the work ahead. It wasn't an apology. Richard Blackwood might never be capable of that level of humility, but it was a kind of acknowledgement of his own flaws, of Jessica's right to move forward, of the possibility that they might someday interact as adults with a complicated shared history rather than as guardian and ward. When Jessica finally rose to leave, Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. Victoria will be coming tomorrow. I think she'd like to see you if you were inclined to visit again. Jessica hesitated, caught between competing impulses. Victoria had been the architect of much of her suffering, the subtle cruelties, the pointed exclusions, the constant reminders of Jessica's status as charity case rather than family member. But Victoria was also a woman whose entire identity was built around appearance, now watching that carefully constructed image crumble. I'll think about it, Jessica said finally. No promises. Richard nodded, accepting this as fair. One more thing, he added, as she reached the door. Sullivan, is he good to you? The question, so unexpected from a man who had never shown much interest in her well-being, made Jessica pause. Yes, she said simply. He sees me as a person, not a project. Richard absorbed this, something like regret passing across his face. Good. That's good. Jessica left feeling oddly lightened, as if she'd set down a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of something like peace. 3 days later, Mrs. Chen approached Jessica at the library with an unexpected opportunity. The children's department needed someone to develop programming specifically for disabled children, story times, craft projects, resource guides for parents. Given Jessica's personal experience and her acceptance to Columbia's Disability Studies program, Mrs. Chen thought she would be perfect. It would be a part-time position alongside your regular duties, she explained. But it comes with a title, Accessibility Program Coordinator, and a modest stipend. Jessica stared at her, processing the offer. It wasn't just additional income, though, that was welcome. It was professional recognition, a chance to use her experience to help others, a stepping stone toward her future career. I'd need to design the whole program, Jessica asked. Mrs. Chen nodded. From the ground up. You'd have support, of course, but essentially yes. This would be your project to shape. Jessica felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. The Blackwoods had never trusted her with anything of consequence, had treated her as inherently less capable because of her disability. Now she was being offered responsibility, not despite her disability, but because of it, because her lived experience provided valuable perspective. I'll need to think about it, Jessica said. Mrs. Chen smiled. Take all the time you need. But Jessica, she added as she turned to go, I wouldn't have offered if I didn't think you could do it brilliantly. The vote of confidence, so simply delivered, stayed with Jessica throughout the day. By evening, she knew her answer would be yes. Another step toward defining herself by what she could contribute rather than by what had been taken from her. When she shared the news with Mark over dinner, his pride was evident. That's incredible, Jessica, perfect timing. With your Columbia studies, too practical application of the theory you'll be learning. And the title will look great on your resume when you apply for positions in New York. The casual mention of her eventual departure created an unexpected pang in Jessica's chest. They'd been carefully avoiding the topic of her spring semester move to New York, focusing instead on her online courses and library work. The unspoken agreement seemed to be that they would cross that bridge when they came to it, enjoying their time together without dwelling on its temporary nature. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Jessica found Mark on the porch swing, their unofficial location for important conversations. "Mind if I join you?" He moved over, making space beside him. The evening was cool early autumn, bringing a crispness to the air. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching fireflies in the yard. "About New York," Jessica said finally. "In the spring." Mark nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "What about it?" Jessica took a deep breath. "I'm scared. Not of Columbia or the city or living alone. I'm scared of leaving this." The admission cost her more than she'd expected, vulnerability never having been her strong suit. Mark was quiet for a moment. "New York is only a 4-hour drive," he said finally. "There are these remarkable inventions called phones and computers that allow people to stay in touch across distances. And I'm reasonably certain they have school breaks at Columbia where students are allowed to visit home if they want to." Home. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Jessica had lived at Blackwood Manor for 10 years, but had never once thought of it as home. This modest colonial with its creaking porch swing had earned that title in less than 3 months. "We'd want you to visit," Mark said quietly. "Lily would insist on it, and I—" His voice faltered. Jessica looked at him, really looked at him in the dim porch light. Over the past 3 months, Mark Sullivan had become more than her rescuer, more than her landlord, more than Lily's father. He'd become someone whose opinion mattered to her, whose smile could brighten her day, whose steady presence made her feel safe in ways she'd never experienced before. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "And you?" she prompted softly. Mark met her gaze, something shifting in his expression. "I would miss you, Jessica. More than I probably have any right to." The admission, so simple and yet so profound, made Jessica's breath catch. "I would miss you too," she whispered. There was a moment of charged silence, possibilities hanging between them. Then Mark reached for her hand, his palm warm against hers. "So we'll figure it out," he said. "Day by day. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who care about each other, navigating some geographic challenges." The practical framing, so typical of Mark's accountant mindset, made Jessica smile despite the weight of the moment. Day by day, she agreed, her fingers intertwining with his. It was enough for now, this tacit acknowledgement of feelings neither of them was quite ready to name. They had time to explore what was growing between them, to move at their own pace without pressure or predetermined outcomes. For someone who had spent a decade trying to earn love through perfect behavior, the gift of that unhurried space was immeasurable. Family Day arrived with a crisp October chill that turned the leaves around Maple Street Elementary vibrant shades of red and gold. Jessica stood in the school hallway, library ID badge around her neck, and a tote bag of specially selected children's books at her feet. The nervousness she felt had nothing to do with public speaking. Years of library story times had cured her of that, and everything to do with standing beside Mark as if they were a unit, a family presenting together to Lily's classmates and their parents. Mark seemed to sense her anxiety, his hand briefly touching the small of her back as they waited their turn. "You'll be great," he murmured. "The kids will love hearing about the library." "It's the moms I'm worried about," Jessica whispered back, eyeing a cluster of well-dressed women with highlighted hair who kept casting curious glances her way. Small towns had long memories and active gossip networks. The Blackwood wedding drama had not gone unnoticed, nor had Jessica's subsequent move into the Sullivan household. Mark's smile turned wry. "Let them whisper. We know what's real." Ms. Reynolds, Lily's teacher, appeared in the hallway doorway. "Sullivan family." "You're up next." Jessica felt something flutter in her chest at the casual labeling. Sullivan family, as if she belonged with them to them. Lily grabbed both their hands, pulling them forward with characteristic enthusiasm. "That's us. Come on." Mark's eyes met Jessica's over Lily's head, a question in them that she couldn't quite answer. The classroom was bright with children's artwork and educational posters. 20 second graders sat cross-legged on a colorful rug, their faces upturned with the unabashed curiosity of 7-year-olds. A few parents stood at the back of the room, including several of the coffee cup moms now watching with undisguised interest as Lily proudly introduced them. This is my dad. He does accounting, which means he helps people with money and taxes and boring stuff, but he's really good at it. And this is Miss Jessica. She works at the library and knows everything about books, and she lives with us and makes the best spaghetti and helps me with my rock collection. The simplicity of the introduction, the easy inclusion of Jessica in their unit made something tighten in her throat. Mark began his portion of the presentation explaining accounting in child-friendly terms, with a patience and humor that clearly came from practice. The children listened with varying degrees of attention, more interested in the calculator apps on his phone than in the concept of balancing budgets. Then it was Jessica's turn. She'd prepared carefully selecting books with protagonists who overcame physical differences, who found strength in diversity, who created families from unlikely connections. She read excerpts with the practiced cadence of a children's librarian, showing illustrations, asking questions, engaging even the most fidgety students. When she pulled out puppets for a short skit about library adventures, the children erupted in delighted laughter. As she finished, one little boy in the front row raised his hand, his expression serious. "Are you Lily's new mom?" The classroom went silent. Jessica froze the book in her hand, suddenly heavy. Before she could formulate a response, Lily stepped forward, hands on her hips in a posture of authority beyond her years. "No, silly. My mom's in heaven. Miss Jessica is different. She's family we chose instead of got born with. That makes her special." The matter-of-fact explanation delivered with a child's unshakable certainty left Jessica momentarily speechless. Mark stepped in smoothly, thanking the class for their attention as he guided Jessica and Lily toward the door. In the hallway, Jessica finally found her voice. "I'm sorry if that was awkward. I didn't know how to answer that question." Mark shook his head, his expression thoughtful rather than embarrassed. "You didn't need to. Lily handled it perfectly. And she was right. Chosen family is special." Jessica studied his face, looking for any sign of discomfort at his daughter's casual inclusion of Jessica in their family definition. She found none, only a quiet certainty that matched Lily's own. The three of them walked to the car in comfortable silence, each processing the moment in their own way. As Mark unlocked the doors, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, his expression shifting from contentment to concern. "It's the office. There's a situation with one of the Blackwood accounts. I need to go in." Jessica nodded immediately. "Go. Lily and I will be fine." The trust implicit in that exchange, Mark's willingness to leave his daughter in Jessica's care without hesitation, Jessica's confidence in handling whatever might arise was not lost on either of them. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Jessica sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea waiting for Mark to return. The family day experience kept replaying in her mind Lily's casual claim of Jessica as chosen family. Mark's equally casual acceptance of that claim, her own surprised pleasure at being included so publicly. Chosen family. The phrase echoed resonant with possibility and permanence. Choice implied, intention commitment, a deliberate decision to connect rather than the accident of birth or obligation of duty. The headlights of Mark's car swept across the yard as he pulled into the driveway. He joined her on the swing, his tie loosened, fatigue evident in the set of his shoulders. Long day. Jessica handed him her tea, which he accepted gratefully. The account situation was its serious. Mark sipped before answering, some of the tension in his face easing. "Richard's been making questionable decisions lately. The drinking isn't helping. The board is considering a vote of no confidence." The Blackwoods had receded to the periphery of Jessica's consciousness, lately displaced by the immediate concerns of her New Life Columbia coursework library projects, navigating her evolving relationship with the Sullivans. But they were still out there, still dealing with the consequences of that wedding confrontation. "I saw Rebecca today," Mark continued. "At the office. She's worried about her father." Jessica straightened, surprised. "Is he okay?" Mark hesitated. "Not really. He's talking about selling the company. Or major parts of it anyway. The board's pushing back. Rebecca thinks he's having some kind of breakdown." Jessica absorbed this information, uncertain how to feel. The Richard Blackwood she knew had been cold, calculating, using her tragedy for public relations, while privately treating her as an inconvenience. The idea of him breaking down, losing control of the company he'd built, should have felt like justice. Instead, it left her with a complicated empathy she hadn't expected to feel. People aren't villains in their own stories, Mark said softly, seeming to read her thoughts. Even the Blackwoods. The truth of that observation settled between them. People were rarely all good or all bad. The Blackwoods had taken her in when they didn't have to, had provided material comfort and educational opportunities, however grudgingly. Their cruelty had been quiet, insidious, the thousand small cuts of exclusion rather than outright abuse. And she had survived them, had emerged stronger, more compassionate, more determined to create genuine connections rather than performative ones. 2 weeks later, while Jessica was in the middle of her Thursday evening Columbia online seminar, her phone lit up with a text from Jason's father in hospital. Car accident. Drunk driving. He's stable but banged up. Mother's a wreck. Jessica stared at the message, a cold knot forming in her stomach. She'd seen Richard just once since his rehab stay, a brief, awkward meeting at a local coffee shop. He'd seemed better, more present, less imperial. They'd managed a conversation that, while not warm, had at least been civil. The news that he'd relapsed hit her harder than she'd expected. As soon as her class ended, she called Jason for details. The accident had occurred less than a mile from Blackwood Manor. Richard had driven his Mercedes into a tree at low speed, suffering a broken collarbone and facial lacerations, but no life-threatening injuries. He'd been well over the legal limit. The police had been discreet so far, but the incident would inevitably become public knowledge. The board was meeting tomorrow to discuss leadership options. Victoria was alternating between fury and despair. Jessica listened, that same complicated empathy rising within her. Part of her wanted to distance herself from the Blackwood drama, entirely to focus on her studies, her work, her growing connection with Mark and Lily. Another part recognized that her history with the family, for better or worse, was a significant chapter in her life. Complete separation might not be possible or even desirable for her own healing. When I was little, she told Mark later that night, after describing the situation, I used to fantasize about the Blackwoods losing everything. Their money, their status, their perfect reputation. I thought it would make me feel better knowing they suffered too. The confession felt dangerous, a revelation of the darkness she carried alongside her resilience. Mark considered this without judgment. And now that it's happening, does it make you feel better? Jessica shook her head slowly. No, it just feels sad, for all of us. Mark's hand found hers on the swing between them, a silent acknowledgement of the complexity of human emotion, how it was possible to resent someone's cruelty while simultaneously grieving their downfall, how healing didn't always follow the neat narrative arcs of children's stories. The next morning, Lily asked about the accident during breakfast, having overheard Jessica's conversation with Mark. Jessica explained in child-appropriate terms that Mr. Blackwood, the man she used to live with, had been hurt in a car accident. Lily's response was immediate and certain. We should make him a get-well card. That's what you do when people are hurt, even if they weren't very nice. Jessica looked at Mark over Lily's head, finding gentle encouragement in his expression. Okay, she agreed. After school today, we can make a card. Lily nodded, satisfied with this plan, then returned to her detailed explanation of why dinosaur-shaped waffles tasted better than regular ones. That evening, Jessica drove to the hospital alone, a simple card in hand. Richard was asleep when she arrived, his face bruised, an IV in his arm. Victoria sat beside the bed, her perfect posture unchanged despite the circumstances. She looked up as Jessica entered, surprise flickering across her features before her expression smoothed into its usual impassivity. For a moment, they regarded each other in silence, the woman who had failed to mother her and the girl who had failed to earn her love. Jessica extended the card, a peace offering of sorts. It's from Lily, Mark's daughter. She wanted Mr. Blackwood to know someone was thinking of him. Victoria took the card, her fingers brushing Jessica's briefly. Thank you, she said, the words stiff but seemingly sincere. And for coming yourself, you didn't have to. No, Jessica agreed, I didn't. But sometimes we do things not because we have to, but because we choose to. That's what family means. The pointed comment hung in the air between them, years of unspoken hurt crystallized in those simple words. Victoria's perfect mask slipped, slightly revealing something like regret in the lines around her eyes. We did what we thought was best for you, she said, her voice lacking its usual certainty. Perhaps we were wrong. It was the closest thing to an apology Victoria Blackwood was capable of offering. Jessica accepted it for what it was. Not the full reckoning she might have once needed, but an acknowledgement of error that represented significant growth for a woman who had built her identity on always being right. "I hope he recovers quickly," Jessica said, nodding toward Richard's sleeping form. "And I hope you both find some peace." As she turned to leave, Victoria's voice stopped her. "Sullivan seems like a good man. You and the little girl, you look like a family." The observation coming from the woman who had systematically excluded Jessica from true family belonging for a decade carried a weight that Jessica hadn't expected. "We're figuring it out," she said simply. Day by day, November brought Jessica's first midterms in the Columbia program, a frantic week of papers and online presentations that kept her up late into the night. Mark and Lily adapted their routines to accommodate her academic schedule. Mark taking over more of the cooking and school drop-offs, Lily practicing quieter play when Jessica needed to study. Small accommodations that spoke volumes about their commitment to her success. The night after her final paper submission, Mark surprised her with a small celebration dinner. He and Lily had decorated the dining room with streamers and a hand-painted banner proclaiming, "Congrats, Jessica." Lily had made cupcakes somewhat lopsided but enthusiastically frosted. "I know it's only midterms," Mark said, noting Jessica's surprise, "but we thought your hard work deserved the recognition." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, the recognition of her academic efforts as worthy of celebration, brought unexpected tears to Jessica's eyes. The Blackwoods had never acknowledged her educational achievements, had treated her community college courses as a hobby rather than a serious pursuit. Mark and Lily not only supported her Columbia studies, but took pride in them marking milestones with the same enthusiasm they would their own. During dinner, Lily chattered about her upcoming birthday party, counting off on her fingers how many friends she wanted to invite. "And you'll help with the games, right, Miss Jessica? It's a rock and mineral theme." Jessica smiled at the child's enthusiasm. "Of course I'll help. I wouldn't miss it for anything." The easy promise, the assumption that Jessica would be present for this family milestone felt both natural and significant. Later that evening, Jessica received an email that changed everything again, an offer from the Columbia University Library for a part-time position in their special collections department starting in January with the spring semester. The role would involve fewer hours than her current library job, but would provide valuable experience in an academic setting, complementing her coursework perfectly. It was the final piece of the New York puzzle, the professional opportunity that would make the transition not just possible but practical. With this position, Jason's financial support, and her partial scholarship, she could afford a modest apartment near campus. She could become a full-time in-person Columbia student as planned. She could move forward with the future she'd been working toward for years. Yet the prospect of leaving the Sullivan household in just 2 months has created a hollowness in her chest that no academic or professional opportunity could fill. In 4 months, this modest colonial with its creaking porch swing and mismatched furniture had become more home than anywhere she'd lived since the accident that took her parents. Mark and Lily had become more family than the Blackwoods had ever been. The thought of leaving them, even temporarily, even for good reasons, felt like voluntarily returning to exile. She showed the email to Mark that night, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His smile was genuine, but didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's fantastic, Jessica. Perfect timing with the spring semester. A real foot in the door at an academic library." Jessica nodded, unable to share his enthusiasm despite the objectively good news. "I'd have to move right after New Year's," she said quietly. "That's only 8 weeks away." Mark nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "We always knew this was the plan. For you to go to New York, finish your degree, build your career. Columbia was always your goal long before you met us." Jessica studied his face, looking for some indication that he wanted her to stay, that her presence in their lives mattered as much to him as theirs did to her. But Mark Sullivan, ever the considerate host, would never pressure her to choose between her dreams and his household. Before Jessica could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. "You're leaving, sir." Lily stood there in her pajamas, teddy bear clutched to her chest, eyes wide with hurt and confusion. Neither Jessica nor Mark had heard her come downstairs. How much had she overheard Jessica knelt down to the child's level, heart aching at the betrayal in those brown eyes so like her father's. "Not right away," she said gently, "and not forever. I got a job offer in New York where my school is. I'd still visit. A lot." Lily's lower lip trembled. "But you live here. With us. You said you wouldn't disappear." Jessica glanced up at Mark, who looked equally pained by his daughter's distress. I'm not disappearing, Lily, she promised. I'm just... She trailed off, uncertain how to explain the complexities of adult life to a 7-year-old. Mark stepped in, his voice gentle but firm. Miss Jessica has worked very hard to get into a special school in New York. Remember how we talked about how important education is? This is her chance to follow her dream. Lily looked between them, tears welling in her eyes. But what about our dreams, about being a family? The question, so simple and devastating, hung in the air between them. Jessica felt something crack in her chest, the protective shell she'd built around her heart during those 10 years with the Blackwoods, the careful distance she'd maintained even as she grew closer to Mark and Lily. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, words failing her entirely. Mark knelt beside her, one hand on Lily's shoulder, the other reaching for Jessica's. Dreams change sometimes, he said quietly, and families can take different shapes. Even if Jessica moves to New York for school, she'll still be connected to us. She'll visit and we'll visit her, and we'll talk on the phone and video chat. She'll still be part of our lives, just in a different way. Lily considered this, her small face scrunched in concentration. Like how mommy's in heaven but still part of our family. The innocent comparison made Jessica's throat tighten painfully. She squeezed Mark's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. Not exactly, she managed, because I'll still be here on Earth, just a few hours away by car. This seemed to reassure Lily somewhat, though her expression remained troubled. Can I come to New York to visit? She looked between them hopefully. Jessica smiled through the ache in her chest. Absolutely. I'll show you the big library where I'll be working. It has lions outside. Lily's eyes widened at this enticing detail. Real ones, Mark laughed, the tension in the room breaking slightly. Stone ones, very impressive stone ones. Now, young lady, it's well past your bedtime. We can talk more about this tomorrow. Lily hugged Jessica fiercely before allowing her father to lead her back upstairs, Teddy Bear trailing behind them. When Mark returned, he found Jessica on the porch swing, despite the November chill. Mind if I join you? She moved over wordlessly, making space beside him. For a while, they just sat in silence, the swing creaking gently, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. I'm sorry about that, Mark said finally. I didn't realize she was listening. Jessica shook her head. Don't apologize. She deserved to hear it from me, not overhear it like a secret. She leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his warmth. What if I don't want to go, she whispered. The admission cost her more than she'd expected. Years with the Blackwoods had taught her that expressing personal desires was dangerous, that putting her own needs first was unacceptable. Mark was quiet for a long moment. Then carefully, what if I don't want you to go either? Jessica lifted her head to look at him, finding unexpected vulnerability in his eyes. I know it's selfish, he continued. I know Columbia is an incredible opportunity. I know you deserve every chance to build the future you want. But these past 4 months with you here, he paused, choosing his words deliberately. They've been the happiest months Lily and I have had since Patricia died, and I can't help thinking that's not a coincidence. The confession, offered with such honest simplicity, broke something open inside Jessica. For so long, she'd been the one in need, the one receiving help, the one being rescued. The idea that she might have given something valuable in return, not just practical assistance with cooking and childcare, but genuine joy, felt revolutionary. I don't know what to do, she admitted. I've been working toward Columbia for so long. It was my escape plan, my way out of the Blackwoods world. But now that I'm already out, already free, she gestured helplessly. I'm not sure it's what I want anymore, or at least not like this, not at the cost of what we've built here. Mark took her hand, his palm warm against her cold fingers. What about a compromise, he suggested. Take the spring semester online too. Defer the in-person component and the library job until fall. Give yourself more time to be sure to save money to figure out what you really want. Columbia isn't going anywhere. The suggestion resonated with Jessica, a middle path that honored both her ambitions and her attachments. But the practical part of her mind raised immediate objections. My scholarship requires in-person attendance by spring, and the library position won't wait until fall. That's assuming they'd even offer it again. Mark nodded, acknowledging these realities. Then we need to think bigger. What if you transferred to a program closer to home? Rutgers has an excellent disability studies concentration. It's only an hour away. You could commute if you wanted to. Or if New York is really where you need to be, maybe Lily and I could. He trailed off, the implications of what he was suggesting hanging between them. Jessica stared at him. You would consider moving to New York with Lily, uprooting your whole life. Mark's smile was soft in the dim porch light. For the right reasons, yes. Though we'd need to discuss it with Lily first, and with Nancy. And it wouldn't be immediate. I'd need to find a position there, arrange a transfer, sell the house. But it's not impossible. The willingness to even consider such a major life change, not as a grand romantic gesture, but as a practical possibility to be carefully evaluated, spoke volumes about Mark's feelings. The Blackwoods had never adjusted their lives to accommodate Jessica's needs or dreams. They'd expected her to fit into the spaces they designated, to be grateful for whatever they offered. Mark was suggesting the opposite, a reshaping of his life, to include her, a recognition that her goals mattered equally to his own. You would do that for me. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. Mark's hand tightened around hers. With you, he corrected gently. There's a difference. The distinction mattered. This wasn't about sacrifice or obligation, but about mutual growth, shared futures, chosen family. They sat in silence for a while, watching their breath cloud in the cold night air, considering possibilities neither had dared voice before. I need time to think, Jessica said finally. This is a lot. Mark nodded, understanding as always. No rush, no pressure. We've got time to figure this out. Together. The word together lingered as Jessica made her way upstairs to bed that night. Together. Not alone, not abandoned, not tolerated as an obligation, but actively chosen as a partner in decision-making. For someone who had spent a decade being managed rather than consulted, the experience of being treated as an equal participant in life-changing choices was both terrifying and exhilarating. The following week brought an unexpected development, a letter from Columbia's Disability Services Department. Given Jessica's circumstances and academic performance, they were offering an unusual accommodation, a hybrid program that would allow her to complete most coursework online while attending in-person sessions just 1 week per month. The special collections position could be similarly modified with concentrated work periods during her campus visits. This third option, neither full relocation nor complete deferral, caught Jessica by surprise. She'd never considered a middle path that might allow her to maintain both her Columbia connection and her place in the Sullivan household. The fact that the university had proactively offered such an arrangement suggested they valued her enrollment enough to be creative about retention. When she shared the letter with Mark, his face lit up with genuine excitement. This could work, Jessica. You'd get your degree from Columbia, get experience in their library, but still be based here most of the time. Best of both worlds. Jessica nodded slowly, the possibilities taking shape in her mind. I'd need to find affordable accommodations for those weeks in New York, and transportation would be an issue. Mark, ever the practical accountant, was already calculating. With your scholarship and Jason's support, plus what you're making at the library here, it should be manageable. And Nancy has a cousin in Brooklyn with a spare room who might be willing to work something out. The way he immediately began problem-solving, looking for ways to make her dreams possible while preserving their connection, confirmed what Jessica was beginning to understand, that this man saw her aspirations not as an inconvenience or a threat, but as a natural extension of who she was, deserving of the same support he would give his own goals. When they explained the hybrid option to Lily the next day, her reaction was predictably enthusiastic. So you'll still live with us most of the time, and I can still come visit you in New York and see the stone lions, and you'll still be here for my birthday. The rapid-fire questions made both adults laugh, the tension of the past few days finally breaking. Yes, and definitely yes, Jessica assured her. I wouldn't miss your birthday for anything. Later that evening, Jessica called Jason to update him on the Columbia developments and to thank him for his continued financial support. Their relationship had evolved over the past few months, moving beyond formal interactions about money to something approaching genuine siblinghood. To Jessica's surprise, Jason mentioned he was considering a permanent return from London, not just to help manage the company crisis, but to reassess his own priorities. Father's accident was a wake-up call, he admitted. I've spent my whole life trying to be the perfect Blackwood son, follow the perfect Blackwood career path. But for what? A name on a building, a corner office. The approval of people who measure success in acquisitions rather than connections. Jessica understood his disillusionment all too well. The Blackwoods had a way of shaping those in their orbit according to their own values, often at the cost of authentic happiness. "I think you'd be good at whatever you chose to do," she told him, "even if it's not what Richard and Victoria had planned." Jason's laugh held more genuine amusement than she'd ever heard from him. "I never thought I'd be getting life advice from my little sister. But here we are." The casual claim of kinship sister rather than ward or charity case meant more to Jessica than Jason could possibly know. As December arrived, bringing with it the first snowfall and holiday preparations, Jessica received one final piece of news that helped solidify her decision. Mrs. Chen approached her at the library with an unexpected proposal. The board had approved funding for a full-time accessibility services coordinator position, building on the success of Jessica's children's programming. If she was interested, the role could be hers, starting in January with flexibility to accommodate her Columbia schedule. It was everything Jessica could have hoped for: professionally meaningful work in a field she was passionate about, a salary that would provide genuine independence, recognition of her talents and contributions. Combined with Columbia's hybrid program offer, it created a path forward that honored both her ambitions and her attachments. When she shared the news with Mark that evening, his pride was evident. "That's incredible, Jessica, well-deserved and perfectly timed." Jessica nodded, a sense of clarity settling over her. "I'm going to accept both offers," she said. "The hybrid program at Columbia and the full-time position here. I want to build my future, but I want to build it here, with you and Lily, if that's still what you want too." Mark's expression softened into something that made Jessica's heart skip. "That's what we want too," he said simply. He reached for her hand across the kitchen table, his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture that had become familiar over the past months, day by day, remember. But with a slightly longer-term plan now. On Christmas Eve, the Sullivan household bustled with activity. Nancy was coming for dinner, bringing her famous apple pie. Lily was vibrating with excitement, convinced she'd heard reindeer on the roof the night before. Mark was in the kitchen, attempting his late wife's traditional Swedish meatball recipe with limited success. Jessica moved through the organized chaos with a sense of belonging that still sometimes caught her by surprise. The doorbell rang as she was setting the table. Probably Nancy. Mark called from the kitchen. "Can you get it?" Jessica opened the door, expecting Nancy's silver hair and warm smile. Instead, she found Jason Blackwood standing on the porch, a neatly wrapped package in his hands and an uncertain expression on his face. "Sorry to intrude on Christmas Eve," he said quickly. "I just wanted to drop this off for you." Jessica invited him in, momentarily disconcerted by this collision of her past and present lives. Jason hesitated in the entryway, taking in the modest decorations, the slightly lopsided tree with its eclectic ornaments, the paper snowflakes Lily had made taped to the windows, the mismatched stockings hanging from the mantel. "It's nice," he said, a note of genuine appreciation in his voice. "Looks like a real home." The observation, so simple and yet so profound, made Jessica smile. "It is," she agreed, "a real home." Mark appeared from the kitchen, dish towel over his shoulder, to introduce himself properly. Lily barreled in from the living room, curious about the visitor. Jason handled the introductions with unexpected grace, kneeling to Lily's level to answer her rapid-fire questions about his job in London. As he prepared to leave, declining their invitation to stay for dinner, with genuine regret, Jason handed Jessica the package. "Merry Christmas," he said. "From me. Not from the Blackwood Family Trust or Father's Guilt Fund or anything else. Just from your brother." The distinction mattered. This wasn't obligation or compensation, but a genuine gift from one person to another. After he left, Jessica opened the package away from Lily's curious eyes. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted. When she lifted the lid, she found a collection of photographs she'd never seen before: her parents on their wedding day at the beach holding her as an infant. Pictures she'd thought lost in the accident that took their lives. A note explained that Jason had hired a private investigator to track down extended family members, distant cousins who might have copies of family photos. It had taken months of searching, but he'd managed to recover these fragments of her history. It was the most thoughtful gift Jessica had ever received, not because of its monetary value, but because it acknowledged her past, her origins, her identity beyond her connection to the Blackwoods. It recognized that she had a history worth preserving, a lineage that existed independently of her status as ward or charity case. As she traced her finger over her parents' smiling faces, Jessica felt a sense of completion of circles closing. She would always carry the scars of her losses, the physical absence of her left arm, the emotional absence of her parents. But she was no longer defined solely by what she lacked. Later that night, after Nancy had gone home and Lily had finally fallen asleep, Jessica and Mark sat on the living room floor in front of the Christmas tree, wrapping last-minute presents. This time last year, Jessica mused, I was sitting alone in my room at Blackwood Manor, wondering if I'd ever have a real Christmas again. The contrast between then and now, between isolation and connection, between performative charity and genuine care, still sometimes took her breath away. Mark set aside the gift he was wrapping, his expression turning serious. There's something I've been wanting to ask you, he said, something important. Jessica's heart stuttered, uncertainty and hope warring in her chest. You know, I've been thinking a lot about what Lily said at Family Day, about chosen family. Jessica nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Mark took a deep breath, fingers absently smoothing a crease in the wrapping paper. When Patricia died, I thought that was it for me. That I'd had my one chance at family, at real connection, and now my job was just to raise Lily as best I could, to get through each day. I never expected, his voice faltered momentarily. I never expected to find someone who would fit into our lives so perfectly, who would see us, really see us, and still want to stay. The Christmas tree lights cast a warm glow across his face, highlighting the vulnerability in his expression. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Lily was right. We've chosen you. I've chosen you. Not because we needed help around the house or because it was the right thing to do that night at the wedding, but because you've become essential to us. To me. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. For so long, she'd been the one in need, the one being rescued, the one being accommodated. The idea that she might be essential to someone else, that her presence might be the gift rather than the burden, was still difficult to fully comprehend. I'm not saying this to pressure you, Mark continued. Your plans for Columbia, your career aspirations, all of that matters. I want you to pursue those dreams. But I also want you to know that whatever shape our relationship takes, whatever decisions you make about New York and your future, you have a permanent place here, with us. If you want it, Jessica searched his face, finding only sincerity there. I do want it, she said quietly. I've spent my whole life feeling temporary. With the Blackwoods, I was always waiting for the day they'd decide I wasn't worth the trouble anymore. Even these past few months, part of me has been bracing for the moment when you and Lily would realize I was taking up too much space, asking for too much. Mark's hand found hers among the scattered ribbons and tape. That's not going to happen, he said simply. That's what I'm trying to tell you. This isn't temporary. We're not the Blackwoods. You don't have to earn your place with us or be perfect to deserve care. You're wanted just as you are. The words, so simple and yet so profound, broke something open inside Jessica. You're wanted, not tolerated, not accommodated, not granted conditional acceptance based on usefulness or perfection or gratitude. Wanted, chosen, essential. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box not wrapped in Christmas paper. It's not what you might think, he said, quickly noting her wide eyes. But I wanted you to have something tangible, something to remind you when doubts creep in, as they probably will. Jessica opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a simple silver key on a delicate chain. A key to the house, Mark explained. I know you already have the regular house key, but this is different. This is a symbol that our home is your home. Not just for now, not just until some arbitrary deadline, but for as long as you want it to be. No matter what happens with Columbia, no matter what the future holds, you belong here. Jessica lifted the necklace from the box, the key catching the Christmas lights. It was beautiful in its simplicity, not an extravagant piece of jewelry like Victoria Blackwood might have commissioned, but a practical object transformed into something meaningful. She slipped the chain over her head, the key settling against her heart. I don't have anything this significant for you, she admitted, suddenly self-conscious about the scarf she'd knitted him, her first attempt at one-handed crafting. Mark smiled. You've given us more than enough already, just by being here, by choosing us back. Jessica leaned forward, closing the distance between them. The kiss, when it finally happened, felt like the most natural thing in the world, not a dramatic declaration, but a quiet confirmation of what they already knew. They had chosen each other. deliberately eyes open with full awareness of each other's flaws and struggles and complexities. Not because they had to, not because they were obligated, but because they wanted to. The mantle clock chimed midnight as they pulled apart. Christmas Day, a fresh start, a new chapter. So what happens now? Jessica asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mark smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Now we keep building, he said simply, day by day, together. On New Year's Day, Jessica sat at her desk, laptop open to her Columbia student portal. The hybrid program offer waited for her formal acceptance. The deadline extended to today as a courtesy. The full-time position at the local library had already been accepted, with her start date set for next week. All that remained was to finalize her academic plans, to commit to the path she'd chosen after months of careful consideration. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Lily stood there in penguin pajamas, her expression unusually serious for an 8-year-old. She'd celebrated her birthday 2 days earlier, proudly announcing she was now almost double digits. Can I ask you something, Miss Jessica? Lily had long since been given permission to drop the miss, but still used it occasionally when addressing serious matters. Of course, Jessica said, motioning the girl to come sit on the bed. Lily climbed up cross-legged, clutching her ever-present stuffed rabbit. If you and Daddy get married someday, would you be my mom, or would you be something else? The question, delivered with such straightforward curiosity, momentarily took Jessica aback. She'd known this conversation would come eventually, especially after Christmas Eve, when Lily had discovered Jessica and Mark holding hands by the tree. But she'd expected it to be directed at Mark, not herself. She considered her answer carefully, wanting to be both honest and age-appropriate. If your dad and I ever get married, she said finally, I wouldn't be trying to replace your mom. No one could ever do that. But I would be a parent to you, someone who loves you and takes care of you alongside your dad. Some people call that a stepmom, but we could figure out what feels right together. Lily nodded, absorbing this information. I think I'd like that, she decided, because I love my mommy, but she can't be here anymore. And it's nice having someone else who loves me too. The simple wisdom in this statement, the recognition that love could expand rather than replace that new connection zone, didn't diminish. Old ones struck Jessica as profound. Is that why you're asking? Jessica inquired gently. Because you think your dad and I might get married? Lily shrugged with the casual confidence of childhood. Eventually, probably. Daddy looks at you the way he used to look at Mommy in the old videos. All soft and smiley, and you look at him that way too. Jessica felt her cheeks warm at this matter-of-fact assessment. You're very observant, she commented, deflecting slightly. Lily nodded, accepting this as simple fact. Grandma Nancy says I notice things other people miss, like how you always touch your necklace when you're thinking about something important. Jessica's hand went automatically to the key pendant at her throat, proving Lily's point. The girl grinned triumphantly. See, you're doing it right now, Jessica laughed, conceding defeat. You got me. I was thinking about something important. My school decision. Lily's expression turned thoughtful again. Are you still going to New York sometimes? Jessica nodded. Yes, but not as often as we originally thought. The school made a special plan for me, so I'll only need to go for 1 week each month. And the rest of the time, I'll be here working at the library and living with you and your dad. This seemed to satisfy Lily. Good, she declared. Because I still want to visit the Stone Lions, but I don't want you to move away. Jessica's heart swelled with affection for this child who had accepted her so completely, who had claimed her as family before the adults had figured it out for themselves. After Lily bounced off to find her father, Jessica turned back to her computer. The decision had been made weeks ago, really, but now she formalized it, accepting Columbia's hybrid program offer, confirming her first campus visit for February, setting the wheels in motion for this next chapter of her life. As she hit submit, Jessica felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't the future she had imagined during those long years at Blackwood Manor. It was better, more balanced, more connected, more true to who she really was. She wasn't just running away from something anymore. She was running towards something. Toward education and career goals, yes, but also toward family and belonging and love freely given rather than desperately earned. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch swing, despite the January chill, bundled in blankets and sipping hot chocolate as they watched the last sunset of the holiday break. Tomorrow, normal routines would resume. Lily back to school, Mark to work, Jessica to the library and her online classes. But something fundamental had shifted in their household dynamic, a subtle but significant evolution from temporary arrangement to permanent connection. Mark's arm rested comfortably around Jessica's shoulders, Lily wedged between them with her chocolate-smeared face. They talked about ordinary things, grocery lists and school projects, and whether the car needed new tires, the mundane details that made up a shared life. No grand declarations, no dramatic pronouncements, just three people who had chosen each other, building their future together day by day. 6 words had changed everything that night at the wedding. Act like you're with me, please. But it was what came after those words that truly mattered. The daily choices to see each other, to support each other, to create something lasting from what could have been merely temporary. Jessica wasn't just acting like she was with them anymore. She was with them fully and by choice. And they were with her not out of obligation or charity, but because they had chosen her just as deliberately as she had chosen them. Family Eleanor Reynolds had said at the wedding isn't about blood or adoption papers or tax write-offs. It's about choosing to love someone every single day, especially when it's hard. Jessica traced the key pendant at her throat, feeling its weight against her skin. She had found her home at last, not in a place but in people who saw her, who wanted her, who chose her every day just as she chose them. The difference was everything.